All right. So as folks continue to join us, I'll go ahead and get started with a bit of an intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia, a bookseller at Politics and Prose, and we are live in conversation with Carolyn Forché, James Carroll, and later Michael Eric Dyson, who will join us, who are going to discuss what just happened, or rather what is still happening as we await the results of this election. This post-election discussion is produced in partnership with Writers Against Trump, a collective of writers who have banded together to oppose the racist, destructive, incompetent, corrupt, and fascist regime of Donald Trump. Writers Against Trump collaborates with organizations seeking to encourage voter turnout, promoting candidates who resist the Trump apparatus, aiding in the effort to protect the election from fraud and theft, and mobilizing in the event of post-election trouble. You can find a link to writersagainsttrump.org in the chat feature at the side of the screen, and we'll also connect you with recent titles authored by our talented panel. If you have a question you'd like to see answered live, please drop it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And remember to vote up your favorite questions, just to practice the democratic process today. Before we begin, we want to sincerely thank you for being with us this afternoon. We are so thankful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. Our moderator this afternoon is a poet and memoirist who recently authored In the Lateness of the World and 2019's What You Have Heard is True, a memoir of witness and resistance. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn Forché.
Thank you, Julia. My name is Carolyn Forché, and I'm a founding member of Writers Against Trump. We began organizing the country's writers, poets, and playwrights on August 3rd in a Zoom meeting with a handful of people, and we now have almost 2,000 members. During the fall, we conducted Zoom plenaries focused on the swing states, but we also knew that this election would be unlike others, not least because it occurs in the midst of a pandemic, but also because of the current political climate. We decided to appeal to the nation's independent bookstores, which often serve as centers of cultural, political, and literary life in their communities, to host a series of urgent meetings this afternoon, culminating in a national assembly this evening at 8 p.m., hosted by Writers Against Trump, and featuring Paul Auster, Salman Rushdie, Rebecca Solnit, and Natasha Trethewey. The link to register for that meeting will be in the chat. And I'll just remind you again to type your questions in the Q&A, and if there's time, we will answer them. Today, we address three important questions: what just happened, what is happening now, and what should happen next and going forward. The most immediate and narrowly construed answer to these questions would include that we have, despite the pandemic and concerted efforts at voter suppression, conducted a national US election peacefully and in compliance with our laws. We are now in the midst of completing the counts in the states of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Alaska, and Pennsylvania. Currently, Mr. Trump has 213 electoral votes and Mr. Biden has 253. We are told that results for the ongoing counts may not be available until this weekend. There is, meanwhile, considerable misinformation on social media regarding our electoral process. With me today is James Carroll and Michael Eric Dyson, who will join us a little bit later. We will each address these questions, and this will be followed by a discussion as time permits. James Carroll is one of the founding members of Writers Against Trump. He is the author of 12 novels and 8 works of nonfiction. For 23 years, he wrote an op-ed column for the Boston Globe, and his work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and other publications. He's received the National Book Award, the Penn Galbraith Award, and the Scripps Howard Award. In 2021, he will publish The Truth at the Heart of the Lie, a reckoning with his life as a Catholic. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson is a Georgetown University sociology professor, a New York Times contributing opinion writer, and a contributing editor of The New Republic and of ESPN's The Undefeated website. He is one of America's premier public intellectuals and the author of over 20 books, including 7 New York Times bestsellers. A political analyst for MSNBC, Dr. Dyson is recipient of 2 NAACP Image Awards and the 2020 Langston Hughes Festival Medallion. I'd like to begin with you, James Carroll, how you would respond to the 3 questions that we are addressing today.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm really pleased to be with you here. Carolyn's, to all of you, my dear friends in this broad virtual community, and I think of you as my community because, for one thing, we have in common a great reverence for politics and prose, a bookstore I have valued for decades now. And also, Carolyn, I have to say what a privilege it is to be with you. Your poetry and witness over the decades has been a kind of North Star for me. And I'm really pleased to be on this platform with you, having collaborated with you over these months. And now we have this climactic moment where you have tuned into this conversation because you too are dealing with the stresses and hopes of this grave American moment. It was a couple of months ago that Carolyn and I and the handful of other writers you referred to did imagine this moment. We did actually conjure a moment when it would be urgently important to ask these 3 questions, these simple, primal questions. What just happened? What is happening now? And what must happen from now on? And I think we knew even 3 months ago that there would be no simple answer to any of the questions. So let me just try to, for a few minutes, lay out the way I'm thinking about it. And I will thank you for this opportunity, because for me, the only way to deal with the inner anxieties I'm carrying is to find words with which to express them, which is, of course, the writer's trade. So thanks for that. And do, by all means, make use of the chat to find ways to express yourself if you can. Well, what just happened? Obviously, the simplest answer Carolyn has given us. Biden has won the popular vote, no matter what the outcome of the ambiguous counting that's underway now. He will have won the popular vote. That is an enormous first thing to say. Thank God Biden won the popular vote. And forgive me if I'm taking for granted a point of view that I suspect we've all come to share. And he's close to a victory in the Electoral College, and we're waiting with skipping hearts for that victory to be confirmed. 71 million people voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I see that Michael Eric Dyson has just joined us. Greetings to you, Dr. Dyson. I'm Jim Carroll. I'm speaking away here. And
the legend himself. All right, sir.
Look forward to the conversation with you. I'm so glad you're here. You've already been, with great dignity, properly introduced by Carolyn Forché.
The great legendary Carolyn Forché. I'm on here with 2 legends. I'm glad to be here. What an honor.
There are legends everywhere in your life. You're famous.
Read them well.
I was just, Michael, if I may, I was just summarizing my own take on these 3 great questions we're asking. What just happened? So Biden has won 71 million votes. As Carolyn indicated, the election institutions have been doing well.
Right.
Violence minor so far, if showing up much at all,
right,
despite the fact that there's plywood everywhere in many American cities.
Yes.
And the vote has not been successfully suppressed by Republicans or even by the pandemic.
Right.
And it's also worth noting as a highlight of this experience that Black people have delivered for Biden. It's quite clear that the overwhelming support of Black Americans is what's making Joe Biden the close candidate now for president. But there's a big but in terms of what just happened. 71 million for Biden, 68 million for Donald Trump, folks. 68 million Americans, almost 50% of the electorate voted for Donald Trump. That is an epiphany of our situation as a nation. Reckon with that right at the top. Carolyn.
Your sound went off.
Am I too loud?
No, it just, I think your mic
was muffled.
Don't hesitate. Usually audiences have to tell me to speak up, but sometimes in this context, I should remember that I don't have to.
It was a reversion to your priestly prophetic power, sir.
Always. The revelation, the unveiling of this power.
There's something with your microphone.
There's something wrong with the microphone, James.
Let me hope for the best, because I'm actually technically incapable of doing much with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think without rubbing it, you got it. Yeah, without rubbing on it. Yeah.
Okay. We're anticipating great good news, a new president, but we also have to not be shy about reckoning with the other half of the news, which is that we live in a nation that's not just sorely divided, but sorely divided in points of view about Donald Trump. Donald Trump, whose first word about this election was effectively to try to overturn it. Frankly, we won this election, and we're going to the United States Supreme Court to stop the voting. It reveals the truth about the people who voted for Donald Trump. It does. We have to reckon with that. And I don't need to unpack what I'm referring to. But it also reveals a perhaps larger truth about the United States of America, that this is where we are, people, half of whom will embrace all that Donald Trump has explicitly come to represent.
Yes. We
must face this. And when half of us are Donald Trump, the immediate question is, who are all of us? And we cannot simply deflect this off on the folks who have embraced what Donald Trump represents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what just happened. Well, let's say that's the text of what just happened. Let me just lift up the context also of what just happened. This morning, it was announced in court in Minneapolis that the 4 police people charged with the murder of George Floyd, say his name, will be tried in Minneapolis together.
Right.
An important revelation that has meaning that we can't unpack right here. That happened this morning. What happened yesterday? Yesterday, the United States of America formally left the Paris Accords. Yesterday, 100,000 new cases of the COVID virus were counted, a new record. Yesterday, we as a people stopped running our hearts on a normal pulse. And the election is only a piece of it. And I think we need it to acknowledge that. We are on the edge of 2 abysses. One is the fate of our climate, and the other is this disease that is killing us by the thousands now. Here is what just happened. Half of us chose death. And the other half of us are not innocent of that choice. What is happening now? Well, Trump's lawyers are trying to disenfranchise the American voter. Still, votes are being counted, as Carolyn pointed out, and even Trump's judges seem shy about engaging his agenda of interfering with it. Protectors of democracy stand by with great nobility and restraint, movements like Protect the Results and Indivisible, people who've mobilized to be ready for the worst. That's a very important thing that's happening right now. Americans are standing up for their democracy with courage and wit and wisdom and restraint. And another thing I'd like to lift up, Joe Biden's manifesting an exemplary act of patience and dignity and giving us a reminder of what politics at its best can look like. Even his failure to ignite a true national reckoning with the politics of Trump, and Biden has failed to do that, alas, with the narrowness of this victory. Even that failure does not take away from his steady demonstration of normal decency. And who'd have ever thought we'd come to the moment when we couldn't take that for granted? It seems like a marvel in our public life to have such an example standing before us, and thank God for it. A revelation of Biden's worthiness as a person. His political worthiness is to be determined. We'll see. But there's no doubt now about his worthiness as a person. And the context, the virus is still thriving. Police violence in this country is still licensed. The climate crisis is ongoing. 1 in 4 families in this country are, as we say now, food insecure. When did we get that phrase in our vocabulary? Education continues to be an engine of contempt. The elites feel licensed to defy the common good. Our social misery is showing itself all over the place. All of that is still happening. So what must happen next? Well, we have to continue the count. We have to defend the election and its integrity in court. We have to stop the legal coup that is underway in our country right now. Trump's provocations must be ignored unless they are actual intrusions on the common good, in which case they must be firmly and politically resisted. And we also must not quite yet take down the plywood, because we'd be fools not to imagine that mayhem may yet sweep over us with the people, the agents of mayhem who have such power. What's the context of all of this? What must happen next is we must keep our eye on the prize, which is a just and democratic society, which means, of course, we must continue to reckon with racism. We must dismantle the patriarchy. We must restructure the economy. These abstractions matter more this moment than ever. So let's not be shy about proclaiming them. We must make sure that education is for knowledge and self-knowledge, not for status. We must, as progressives, institutionalize our movement of progressivism responsibly so it's not so easily swatted away by our politics. We progressives should be ashamed of the ease with which the electorate in this country dismisses our arguments and our calls for action. We progressives are failing. We must not shame the people who reject our message. We must ask questions about why our message is falling on such deaf ears. This is an epiphany also for progressives. This is not our proudest moment. What must be done now? We must do 2 things at once. We must manifest authentic humility, all of us Americans. We must acknowledge that we are all flawed and that we are all mortal. We actually don't know how to do that much in this country. So we must embrace and manifest humility. But the other thing we must do equally is rededicate ourselves to authentic acts of resistance, of powerful resistance, because the values we're defending in this country, and by we, I mean all of you who have tuned into this conversation, are urgently important. They are matters of life and death, not just of democracy, but of human well-being, and in relation to the virus, of the survival of many thousands of people. We must build a politics that protects our very fragile democracy, the fragility of which is more clear now than it has been in many years. If anything has been laid bare for us, not just by the arrival of Donald Trump or by the disgrace he's brought to our country in these 4 years, but by the narrowness of our defeat of him, if that's what it is. If anything's been laid bare by all of that, it is that we, the American people, have some deep moral, not to mention political, reckoning to do, not just with the others whom we so readily dismiss as enemies, but with ourselves. Donald Trump has laid something bare about the whole United States of America. And we will not be worthy of our own best intentions if we don't face that. And so this moment really offers us the opportunity to take another step toward being the people. Not so long ago, somewhat callowly, we presumed we already were, but we're not. So what just happened, what's happening now, what must happen next? That's my summary.
Thank you, James. Dr. Dyson.
Hey, oh, look, can we just go to the offering right now? We done had the homily, man. Well, look, I can hear, I'll take the offering because we got two poetic geniuses, and I don't use that word lightly, that I'm here with, and what an honor it is to be here with both of you. I'm heading to Vanderbilt just as Professor Forché is coming in. I guess the town wasn't big enough for both of us. So as what an honor it is to even be here for a little bit. And I'm here, you know how they say all Black people look alike. So forgive me for saying the following, like I'm looking at Brother Carroll as a beautiful embodiment of John Lithgow at his best. And Carolyn Forché is Diane Keaton at her most cerebral and intelligent and beautiful. So I feel that I'm in a cast of characters that I've got to at least play the Godfather. And but I tell you, what we've just heard is pure Americana at its best. And the insistence of James Carroll that progressives must not condescendingly indict those who do not agree with our message, but instead ask why it is that it falls on deaf ears, is the kernel of a politics that resists cancel culture, right? Because cancel culture, in my mind, is the attempt to wield the enormity of your moral gravity, to mix metaphors, against the vulnerable psyches or egos of your ostensible opponents, and then wedge beneath them with the manifest superiority of your indictment. No, you got to look inward. You got to look deeper. You got to look at who you are, who we are, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. Look at what Brother Carroll just said, right? It would be easy to point the finger at those Trumpites and those Trumpsters and those trumpeters and those people who have willy-nilly become compliant with their own devastation, who have become complicit in their own oppression and demise. And we may lament that, to be certain. But it is part and parcel, woof and warp, if you will, of the same energy that would dismiss them, that created their necessity in the first place. The elites who overlook them, who dismiss them, who don't pay attention to what farmers think about, or mothers on the front line are concerned with, or people in Appalachia or in the Delta are obsessed with, missing the poetry of Patsy Cline or Merle Haggard or the great Hank Williams anyway, right? And so what has just happened is that we have seen the manifestation of the hubris of the American project met squarely in the face by a comeuppance that we didn't desire, we didn't want, we think we don't deserve. And yet Donald Trump is the manifestation of a culture, not vice versa. He was produced out of a womb: white supremacy, white nationalism, American arrogance, the unabashed temerity to believe that you are better than others, fostering and fomenting oppression and antagonism against vulnerable people. He didn't come out of nowhere. He was produced out of a culture that saw fit to look askance at Mexicans or Chicanos or Puerto Ricans, to look down their noses at African American people, to think poorly about poor white folk, red, brown, red and yellow, to look at them as if they were somehow ontologically other, that they are not part of the American fabric, the American mainland. Forgive the references to John Donne at this point, but who the bell is tolling for right now, it's tolling for us, because we have seen them not as part of the same island of consciousness and reality that we possess, that we participate in. So Donald Trump is the outgrowth, the malignant outgrowth of a neglect of the character of ordinary people that has accrued in this culture, both on the right wing and the left wing. And what has happened as well is Dr. King saying that white supremacy ain't just gonna hurt black folk, it hurts white folk too. Doesn't just hurt indigenous people or the BIPOC people and all that kind of stuff. It's hurting white folk too. Because here you are on the ship with us, but because of your thirst for a kind of racial vengeance, you cut a hole in the ship to suck the river, the ocean beneath you to satisfy your desire, but you're killing us all at the same time. And so that metaphor may not walk on all fours or sail on the sea, but the reality is that this is the manifestation of what Dr. King was trying to say, is that if you don't get this thing right, it ain't white versus black, it's right versus wrong. And white supremacy has been embraced. Now we think white supremacy means, we call people the N-word, that's bad too. Or we, hold them down and, make them ashamed of their own, varieties of identity. That's horrible too. But it's also about the systemic inequity to which Mr. Carroll pointed in the aftermath of Mr. Floyd and his death. And any word that ends in system, you got systemic inequity on your hand. Public education system, healthcare system, criminal justice system. And so what has happened is that we've seen the lethal ferocity of an embrace of white supremacy, and the way in which it has hurt a bunch of people besides the people that it thought it was wiping out. Because when Donald Trump is calling women names and calling black women names and calling black folk names and beating up on poor white folk he don't agree with names and calling names to his white opponents and stuff, wait a minute, there's kind of a, what the philosophers call a category mistake. You're supposed to treat them like that, not us. Hey, so what we see now is that Donald Trump has turned the entire nation into the N-word. What Donald Trump has done through a white supremacist ethic is allowed it to metastasize across the body politic, and now everybody is an undifferentiated mass of the other. This is why he has been able to, for 4 years, direct venom and vitriol and hate and despising against not only Black people and not only brown people, but against America writ large, against the canvas of human history over the last 50 years. But in these 4 years, this is the logical outcome of a kind of disregard for the other that King warned us against. So what has happened is that we've seen that occur. We try to let ourselves off the hook by blaming Donald Trump, but getting rid of Donald Trump ain't getting rid of the problem, right? Because we know white supremacy will still be here. Police brutality is still here. Thank God, as Mr. Carroll said, that they didn't allow, like they allowed Rodney King's 4 police people to be moved to Simi Valley, where the fellow white people would dismiss the charges, or not dismiss the charges, but forgive them in advance of the courtroom itself of their sins, their failures, their flaws, their offenses. No, the judge said, stand where you stood, where you rested the entire fulcrum, where the power of your knee was dug into the mortally depressed column of Mr. Floyd, asphyxiating him as a metaphor for what Black people and other people have endured in this nation for so long. And so not moving it is a gesture of moral sanctity manifest in the legal system, thank God. But we ain't getting rid of this stuff when Donald Trump moves out of town, and we hope he moves out soon. We're not getting rid of that stuff. In fact, we might congratulate ourselves for dismissing him and keep the detritus. To our detriment, the overhanging horror that Donald Trump represents is deeply ensconced in our own loins. That's a mixed metaphor, to be sure, but deeply entrenched in the culture in which we live. And so getting rid of him doesn't get rid of it. So what has happened is we've seen the revelation of the worst possible self that we could conjure. Yes, Lincoln, we apologize. The mystic chords of memory notwithstanding, what we see is the worst demons of our nature, not the best angels of our nature, the worst demons of our inclination. And they have been manifest. This is Hannah Arendt. This is the banality of evil rendered, right? Because it's the apparatchik. It's not just the Eichmanns. It's the people on the ground doing everyday things who are complicit in the very horror that we detest. So what we've seen is a difficult, complicated, nuanced revelation of the horror of the American soul, reduced to the flesh of a 73-year-old, 74-year-old white man. And so that's what happened. Let me hurry up because I know we got to go on and listen to more genius from Forché and Carroll. What is happening now is that we are counting. Black people used to counting. They counted us as 3/5 human. 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution, just so they could hold on to slave-owning states and really gin up the math in a way that they could rejigger the measure of human identity for the purposes of a Confederate reality. And before the Confederate, just an American reality that dismissed the legitimacy of Black identity and humanity. So we're used to being uncounted, undercounted, right? We went and worked on after Reconstruction on plantations that are called, that were basically slave plantations, but we called them sharecropping, and they could never count up enough money to give us our adequate wages, and that's why we kept on being indentured even after enslavement. So counting, and then we went to vote at the polls. How many jelly beans are in this jar? How? Right? Asking us questions, counting, people asking questions they couldn't answer themselves, right? This is the irony. And so now we're counting ballots. And look at the irony that Mr. Carroll laid this out very easily. Look at the irony of where we are in an American society committed to justice, freedom, and democracy, and the way in which that democratic ethos and experiment are extended from Emerson and before down to what Al Sharpton is saying, is the fact that in this country, right? As we try to grapple with what it means to be an American and to have a democracy, what's happening now is that we're trying to count on that ability to appeal to the better angels of our nature and to what we have in common that will hold us together, a la Benjamin Franklin. He says, I don't care about religion and anything else. Anything that helps glue together the common will, I will adhere to. And so now what we find ourselves saying is that who we are, what is happening now, we are counting, but we're counting on, and we're counting with, and we're counting up. If these prepositional phrases can reveal any moral intensities, we're counting on America to do the right thing and hope to God or to whatever force of the universe has sway over the events of us frail human beings, that we will do the right thing and that we will allow science. And we don't genuflect before the altar of science. Black people in particular have been viciously mistreated by science. Ask the people of the Tuskegee experiment. But my God, to see Dr. Fauci as an enemy of the state, as we genuflect before the manifestly inferior knowledge of a doctor that the president has hired to do his bidding. So we've lost science. And in the process, ironically enough, we lose poetry. When you lose science, poetry is made to stand in for the absence of scientific rigor. What should happen is that poetry should be an adjunct and an administrator of a higher truth that doesn't have to give in to science, but holds it in check. But to force poetry to become science itself is an offense against nature, or at least the heavenly arts that are mediated to us through the vibrato of a voice that speaks words that holds heaven in their midst. So for me, the thing is, what we're trying to do now is count on these politicians to do the right thing and allow us to have democracy's end and telos realized. And what needs to happen now, we need to learn our lesson, as my daddy used to say. And my daddy used to say, fourth grade education from Albany, Georgia, that's how they called it. He said, did your teachers learn you something today? Right? Yeah. Did your teachers learn you something today? And so we got to learn America something. And what we got to learn America is that now, and hopefully and prayerfully, if we get rid of the scourge, this orange apparition that has besieged the horizon of American possibility, this man who stands up every morning to excrete the feces of his moral depravity into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode, that if we get rid of him, what we have to confront is what was within us. And let us now do the right thing. Listen to Mr. Carroll speaking about the transphobia, the homophobia, the gay, lesbian, and resistance, the resistance against the other, whatever that other is. None of us can afford to have our pet peeves. If you're Black and you worship God, don't go to your church and beat up on the gay person. White gays don't do it against the religious people. And on and on. And so we must have humility and acknowledge that as we prosecute a war against ignorance and against immorality, we understand, not my mother, not my father, but it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer, so that we are introspective and self-critical as we move forward to make certain that we don't hurt and harm each other in the name of restoring balance. And yes, Mr. Biden, Mr. Carroll was right. What he has failed to do is real. And don't give in to the temptation to immediately grasp hold of those across the aisle on the right side while you're ignoring those like AOC and Ayanna Pressley and Ilmar on your own team, who offer something insightful, something beautiful, something edifying and uplifting. And in that sense, we can come together and make America what it was meant to be. But those are a few things I think about where we are.
Dr. Dyson, I understand why Barack Obama says you don't want to follow Dr. Dyson.
Oh, man. He was talking about Forché and Carroll. That's what he was talking about. Man.
We have some audience members who are deeply concerned about those very Trump supporters who will still be with us, of course,
right.
Nearly half the country. What are we going to do about this? Asks one of the audience members. What is it they want and why are they okay with the suffering of others?
I would like to offer a comment on that. May I, Carolyn?
Yes, please.
I ended my thoughts inadequately by suggesting we have to do two things at once. And this is an instance exactly where, and whoever asked this very important question really makes an important point. We have to firmly resist everything that people who've embraced Trump have embraced. And what they represent about not just this nation, but about the human species today. They represent a dangerous and effectively murderous form of denial and self-indulgence. And it must be called out for what it is. Can we do that while also acknowledging that whoever embraces Trump is also of me, of my life, of my community, of my nation for that matter? And that there are ways in which I am obliged to hear the scream that is embedded in the vote for Trump. The vote for Trump has been characterized as a middle finger. That actually doesn't do it justice. It's a scream from a desperate heart. It's a terrified and terrifying, but terrified cry for help. Every monster, is this Yeats? Is someone to whom something monstrous has been done. We are a nation of monsters. And I'm not just now talking about the Trump people. Let's remember who the rest of us are also. We are the ones who blithely and without asking any questions fund the murderous machine of the American military. We are the ones who blithely and without a second thought have conducted an 18-year-long war that has killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people in the Middle East and sent millions of desperate refugees across the continent of Europe, destabilizing it profoundly. That belongs to all of us. We're the people who blithely accept the American addiction to nuclear weapons. Are we better than people who are pissed off because of how the elites have treated them and made them feel and made them sure that they're less worthy?
Lord.
We are all in trouble in this country. The United States is the NRA of the world, and we all benefit. The same way in which northern fabric makers, people who made clothing out of cotton, benefited from the systems of slavery. And the ways in which we Northerners have congratulated ourselves for more than a century for our opposition to slavery has kept us from reckoning with the ways in which we were fully complicit in it. A reckoning that is finally beginning to happen. The way in which slavery is the ground of American economy and prosperity, not just then, but now, which is of course, why there has to be some kind of reparation. Let me repeat it. Trump and all who've embraced him must be resisted full force, nonstop. But that's not the same thing as to say they must be dehumanized, excommunicated, executed. Because that act of political resentment, that's where it leads. Yeah. And we are a commonwealth. And it isn't about sort of banal, feel-good, kumbaya Democratic Party politics that we get from Joe Biden wanting to work across the aisle. I'm not talking about that, although that's actually part of it. I'm talking about our refusing to assume that we are better than anybody else. we're all in this together. And that's more true today with this terrifying election than it has been in years. We're all in this together.
Amen.
Rather than a wall, these times have held a mirror to us. And it's the legacy of slavery, and it's the legacy of the founding genocide. I do have a question that you, Dr. Dyson, might be able to
Please call me Michael. Please call me
Okay,
Michael. So
Michael,
people
I'm
can,
sorry.
so people
That's
can
a
believe I
public
know you.
I
Yeah.
know. There's an audience member who saw in a piece in Essence magazine that 55% of white women and 18% of Black men voted for Donald Trump based on the exit polls. Black women's support for Trump continues to be minuscule, but doubled 8% in 2020 compared to 4% in 2016. Trump's support among Latino voters significantly increased. So this person says, could these numbers be true? And if so, how could this be?
Well, if I can briefly respond to that. Yeah, I've saw, well, 50, that's right, because the number went up, because last time around it was 53% of eligible white women who voted for Trump. Now it's 55. The numbers of Black women doubled. Black men increased as well. This is the point that Carroll is making. This is what, there is no better, he must have set that up. I think he put that question in there to justify what he just said, because he said it's us. He said it's us. It ain't, don't be pointing the finger at them. It's that old thing where you're like, it's a thumb pointing back at you. So, now there are different reasons. Sometimes the desperation of Black people is like, look, this is the guy that's there. He promised me for some people, he promised me a check. For some Black people, right, a stimulus check, right? And I need that, right? This is the same thing Carroll is speaking about when he talks about how people out of desperation have made choices. We indict them, we hold them to account, but we can't destroy them, because there are mothers and uncles and sisters and cousins and fellow human beings. So I heard that some Black people were paid. Now we know that's illegal, but let's be real. In the hood, if you get $100, $200 to go vote for Trump, you're doing it. I'm not using that to justify or exempt. I'm saying this is the Carrollian point, that we must look within. And as you, Professor Forché said, the mirror is being held up. So now, why Black people have always been seduced. Women have always been seduced by stuff that ain't good for us, that is complicit with the anti-feminist agenda, that's complicit with the anti-Black agenda. We internalize that. Some of us are seduced. Some of us are tricked. Some of us feel that it's a temporary stopover. Some of us feel that, hey, given the choices, Joe Biden was doing some stuff that was crazy back in the day. This is the devil I know versus the one I don't. So there are all kinds of reasons why that would occur. Now, they would seem loony to us. They would seem quite, meritorious. They could be opportunistic. They could be ill-informed, and some of it is just plain dumb. Some of it is plain ornery. Some of it is plain self-destructive. Some of it is complicit with the very forces of oppression, and some of it is buying what Trump said. Now, let's be honest. Trump met with the Congressional Black Caucus in 60 days. It took Obama 2.5 years. I'm just saying. Trump said, I'm going to not hold you accountable, even though he did some horrible stuff with the historically Black college and university, but I'm gonna try to hook you all up in a way that Barack Obama found problematic. I'm not gonna go out giving you lectures. Now, people were insulted when Jared Kushner said, Black people have to want to do well, to be successful. Oh my God, who is this dude? Even Obama asked it. How are you asking it when I heard you say some stuff at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington that Black people in the 60s using the depths of iconic figures to justify some of the violence they were doing in their own communities and not wanting to work hard? How you sounding different than Jared Kushner, homie? So there are some complicated, nuanced perspectives going on here, where if I were Donald Trump's publicity guy, I could have gave him a lot more better press in terms of, hey, I've done some stuff the first Black president didn't do. So some people saw that, believed that, We had famous rappers, you know, flirting with, endorsing Mr. Trump. I think Ice Cube got a bad deal because he put out a document that says whosoever will can look at it, check it out, let me know what you think. That's different than Lil Wayne endorsing him. Lil Wayne, the rapper from New Orleans, who, when he was 12 years old, tried to kill himself, shot himself in the chest, didn't work. A white cop found him and took him to the hospital. That's why he has a kind of blinkered empathy for cops across the board. I'm saying all this to say there are a lot of reasons why people would do it. I think it's destructive. I think it's harmful. I think it's unfortunate. But there are reasons that people put forth for embracing a figure like Trump. And even a guy like him can be seductive ultimately, and then can make us believe that he has offered us something that is relieving of the misery to which we are subject. But other than that, I ain't got much for you.
There are several people who are interested in how we can appeal to those Trump supporters, how we can create progressive policies that address systematic racism and much else in ways that do not alienate these voters. Didn't they just reject those policies? And another says, well, the problem is we're talking among ourselves how to open the eyes and ears of the other half of Americans. What do we do to reach them? I think that is the essence of the question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I glibly called for the progressive movement to be more serious about institutionalizing itself. What I have in mind, for example, is that the progressive movement, speaking generally now, is rooted in the world of academia. Professors, students, which is one of the reasons progressives are identified with students, the contempt for the political correctness problem on campuses and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The progressive movement in this country began with power associated with unions.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true really even into the 1960s. It's a complicated question about the break that took place, civil rights, the war in Vietnam. The last figure to really embody both sides of this brain, in my view, was Bobby Kennedy. And what was it about Bobby? Well, actually, this is something that actually calls to mind Joe Biden.
Right.
Bobby cut through political and economic stereotypes and barriers.
Yes, he did.
Because he put on display a profound and honest experience of human suffering. When people looked at Bobby Kennedy after 1963, they didn't see a right-winger or a left-winger, a hard-nosed politician, a privileged man. They saw somebody who was defined by suffering. And he didn't wear it on his sleeve as a function of manipulation. It was who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And that was more powerful than the class divide and the racial divide, which is why his campaign for president in 1968, tragically cut short, was the last powerful working class, liberal class, upper class, united class, liberal, progressive movement. We should remember it's possible. Unions associating centrally with the progressive movement, which won't happen unless progressives are earnest about understanding unions as the soul of progressivism. It's complicated, and I'm talking in simplistic terms, I acknowledge it, but that's an example of what I'm talking about.
Well,
And I think very briefly, how to reach them. Look, to admit that horror and pain have descended, to go to them presuming you got a reason for behaving and acting the way you did in terms of embracing a guy we feel is a racist and a sexist and a monster. But we don't want to make it about him. We want to make it about you. What is it? And I think, again, this is what James Carroll was speaking about when he said, don't look down on him, but figure out what is it about him that appealed to you, and what can we do to address that need that doesn't depend upon the horrors and monstrosities of a colossal bigot But instead, the common humanity we should exhibit toward each other as we try to figure out our common problems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why I, again, stand against cancel culture, because you can wipe out the people you don't like and disagree with, but then you end up canceling yourself, and you'll get canceled because you're not as progressive as the other progressives want you to be. You're not as liberal as the liberals want you to be. You're not as, right wing as the right wingers want you to be. You're not as good as the people who are good want you to be good. So, that kind of humility. And now we can't, James Baldwin was right. We're all in it together. Let's love and talk to each other. But where your privilege ends is where me trying to go along with you has to be stopped, because going along with you means you want to end my life, right? I'm saying it inelegantly, but Baldwin was saying that the limit of my tolerance for your viewpoint comes when your viewpoint wants to kill me, wants to wipe me out, wants to eviscerate me. And I think at that level, that's true. But short of that, we got to figure out, wait, Martin Luther King Jr. is sitting down at the table with white bigots who hate Black people,
right,
and still trying to figure out a way to talk about how we can make this a better society, right? Or Nelson Mandela in prison for 27 years and now has to deal with the very society that imprisoned him. And the first act is to forgive them. Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
To forgive them into a better self. And I think that this is what Black people represent at our best in this country still.
And Congressman Moss. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to ask the two of you in closing, because we're out of time. Do you have any immediate advice for the people who have gathered here to listen about the next couple of days? In other words, what do you advise regarding our present circumstances?
Take it in, feel it. Don't be afraid of that anxiety and tension and worry and sorrow and disappointment and dread. It's defining me right now. I acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons I'm grateful to you all for the occasion to be in a community of traumatic experience and caring. But also, it's important to take this in as the powerful reckoning with the truth that it is. Dr. Dyson will know, who added this footnote to the Gospel of John. It might have been Dr. King. Yes, the truth will set you free, but first it will break your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And our hearts are broken as Americans right now. Let's admit it. Yeah. And let's hold that in common with each other, and let's take care of each other.
Yes. Mr. Carroll has to call me Michael before this program is over to prove I actually know him. So he's got to call me Michael so I can prove, yep, I hung out with Mr. James Carroll. But I'll tell you, that point is so powerful. All I can say is amen. If we can honestly believe, as Howard Thurman, the great Black mystic, said, either you're going to be a prisoner of the event that you experience, or you're a prisoner of hope. I choose to be a prisoner of hope at this level, because this ain't the worst we face. As bad as it is, this ain't the worst. And if this is not the worst, when David is facing Goliath, he says, the reason I can beat this big bully over here and this giant is because I had some experience with some bears in caves that are pretty rough. And they were horrible, more horrible than this. And I killed him with fire. I tried your way. I tried your weaponry. I tried to put on Saul's armor and take a knife and slay him. But that's not my weaponry. Hate, denial. This is what the Reverend Dr. Professor James Carroll is talking about. Don't take the weaponry of the enemy to slay the enemy. Use the weaponry that you have, that you understand. 5 smooth stones in a slingshot. So let's hope. I think we're going to prevail. I think we're going to, in this narrow sense, win. But let's make sure in the process we win our own spirits first before we win an election. And if we do that, long after the election is done, we will have restored dignity to our own lives.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this event, and take care and stay healthy. We'll get through this.
No doubt. Thank you all so much for this.
Thank you so much, Carolyn Forché, Michael Eric Dyson, James Carroll, and to all of you out there who are chiming in, who are staying engaged. As like Mr. Carroll said, we take in this time. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you Politics in Prose's amazing programming, and we would not be able to host these types of events without the book sales to support them. If you want to read more writing against Trump, please follow the links in the chat or visit politicsinprose.com so we can stay talking. While you're there, we encourage you to check out our events calendar, which is updated with our most current listings. We love having you here. On behalf of all of us here at Politics in Prose, everyone stay strong, stay safe, stay well.